Ravi Bopara was the kind of man people whispered about but never dared to confront. His empire stretched across industries, his name commanded fear and respect, and his mansion, a towering palace of marble and glass, gleamed like a fortress of wealth. Yet inside those cold, polished walls, warmth was scarce. Ravi was ruthless at business, and he carried that same merciless discipline into his home. The staff never lasted long. In just 3 months, 7 maids had been fired. Sometimes for forgetting to dust a corner, sometimes for serving tea 5 minutes late, and sometimes for nothing at all. His anger was sharp, and his patience thinner than glass. But there was one person who softened him, his 7-year-old daughter, Aisha. She was his world, the only reminder that somewhere beneath his stern exterior, there still lived a father who could love. Aisha was fragile. Born with a rare blood disorder, her life revolved around checkups, medications, and hospital visits. Ravi could afford the best doctors, the most advanced treatments, and still, the fear of losing her haunted him like a shadow. That fear made him harsher, angrier at the world, as if firing people and controlling everything around him could somehow protect his daughter from fate. And then came Shastri. She was nothing like the polished servants who usually walked through those gates. She came from a small village, her clothes plain, her accent rural, but her eyes carried something Ravi hadn't seen in years: sincerity. She needed this job desperately. Her mother was ill. Her younger sister had dropped out of school, and the weight of her family's survival rested on her shoulders. When Shastri entered the mansion for the first time, she whispered a silent prayer. "Please, God, let me keep this one. Let me survive this place." She didn't know that this mansion, with all its glittering chandeliers and silent hallways, would not only test her patience, it would soon demand a sacrifice far greater than she ever imagined. Shastri's first morning in the Bopara mansion felt like stepping into another world. The marble floors reflected her nervous steps. The chandeliers glittered like 1,000 watchful eyes, and every corner was so polished it seemed unnatural. She had worked in homes before, but nothing like this. Here, silence was the rule. The staff moved quickly, quietly, almost fearfully. They whispered instructions to each other, as if afraid the walls themselves would punish them. Shastri could feel the tension in her chest. At breakfast, she witnessed Ravi Bopara for the first time. He sat at the long oak dining table, his posture straight, his eyes buried in the morning paper. He didn't look up when she entered, only flicked his fingers toward the sideboard where tea was waiting. 5 minutes late, he muttered, though. It was barely a minute past 7. Her hands trembled slightly as she poured the tea, careful not to spill a drop. Ravi didn't look at her, didn't thank her, didn't even acknowledge her presence beyond the remark. For him, staff were invisible, unless they made mistakes. But before Shastri could retreat, a small voice broke the tension. "Papa!" Aisha came running in, her tiny frame wrapped in a light sweater, her face pale but her eyes glowing with excitement. She clutched a doll in her hand and leapt onto the chair beside him. Ravi's face softened instantly. He lowered the newspaper, kissed her forehead and pulled her close. "Did you sleep well, Princess?" he asked. His tone was gentle, almost unrecognizable from the man who had just scolded Shastri. "Yes." Aisha nodded, then looked at Shastri curiously. "Papa, is she new?" Ravi glanced briefly toward her. "Yes, don't trouble her. She won't last long." The words hit Shastri like a slap, but before she could lower her eyes, Aisha spoke again. "I like her." It was a simple statement, but it made Ravi look up sharply. Aisha had always been shy with new maids. That she had smiled at Shastri on the very first day was unusual. Shastri knelt down beside her. "Good morning, miss," she said softly. "That's a very pretty doll." Aisha's face lit up. "Her name is Millionaire. Do you want to meet her?" Ravi frowned, but Aisha didn't notice. She placed the doll in Shastri's hands. And for the first time since she had stepped into the mansion, Shastri felt welcome. The days passed, and Shastri quickly realized why so many maids before her had failed. Ravi demanded perfection. The bedsheets had to be tucked at precise angles, the silver polished until it gleamed like mirrors, and the tea brewed exactly to his liking. He pointed out every mistake, no matter how small, and his words were sharp enough to cut. But Shastri didn't break. She had endured worse in her life: hunger, debt collectors banging on the door, neighbors gossiping about her family's struggles. A rich man's temper could not shake her. What kept her going was Aisha. The little girl followed her like a shadow. She wanted to sit with Shastri while she folded laundry, wanted to help her wipe the dust off the shelves, wanted to listen to the folk songs Shastri hummed under her breath. One evening, when Aisha's energy was low and her breathing shallow, Shastri sat by her bedside and sang softly. It was an old village lullaby, one her mother had sung to her. By the time the song ended, Aisha had drifted into peaceful sleep. Ravi had been standing at the door, unseen. He watched the scene with conflicting emotions. He should have been pleased. His daughter had slept easily for the first time in days. But something in him resisted. He didn't like the idea of a stranger holding such influence over Aisha's fragile heart. The next morning, his irritation showed. "You are here to work," he told Shastri curtly. "Not to sing songs and tell stories. Do your duties and keep boundaries." Shastri lowered her eyes, but her voice was steady. "With respect, sir, children don't understand boundaries." "They understand love," Ravi froze. No maid had ever spoken to him like that before. For a moment, his pride flared. He wanted to dismiss her right then, add her to the list of the 7 before her. But something in her tone stopped him. It wasn't defiance, it was honesty. And strangely, it reminded him of his late wife, the only person who had ever dared speak truth to him without fear. That night, disaster struck. It started with a fever. Aisha's skin burned hot, her lips trembled, and her body shook with chills. Ravi rushed her to the hospital in his luxury car, the driver speeding through the midnight streets. Shastri, without being asked, followed. In the sterile glow of the emergency ward, Ravi's wealth meant nothing. Machines beeped, nurses rushed, and doctors whispered in urgent tones. "Her blood count is dropping dangerously," one doctor said. "We need an immediate transfusion. O negative, and it's rare. We don't have enough in stock." Ravi's chest tightened. He barked orders, called private banks, demanded solutions. But for the first time, his commands didn't move the world. The supply would take hours, maybe days. Aisha didn't have that long. He turned toward the doctor, his voice cracking. "There must be another way." The doctor shook his head. "Unless a matching donor is here, we can't proceed." A silence fell. Ravi's empire, his billions, his power, none of it mattered. He was just a father, helplessly watching his daughter slip away. And then a soft voice broke the silence. I'll do it." They turned. Shastri stood there, her hands trembling but her gaze firm. "I'm O negative. Test me. Take whatever you need." Ravi stared at her in shock. A maid, one of the very people he treated as replaceable, was offering the one thing money couldn't buy, her own blood. In that moment, for the first time in years, Ravi Bopara felt something crack inside him. It was the sound of his pride shattering. The hospital room was thick with tension, the steady beeping of monitors echoing like a ticking clock. Nurses prepared the equipment swiftly, while a doctor checked Shastri's vitals. "Her blood type is a perfect match," the doctor confirmed. "We can begin the transfusion immediately." Ravi stood frozen, his mind a storm. For years he had dismissed people as if they were chess pieces, to be moved, replaced, discarded. Yet here was a woman he had barely acknowledged, rolling up her sleeve to save the life of his daughter. "Are you sure about this?" the doctor asked Shastri. Donating blood can leave you weak, and given her condition, we might need more than the standard amount. Shastri looked at Aisha, lying pale and unconscious on the hospital bed. Tubes ran from her arms, her tiny chest rising and falling in shallow breaths. Shastri's voice was firm, though her eyes glistened. "She's just a child. Take what you need. I'll be fine." The doctor nodded, signaling the nurses. Shastri was guided to a chair beside Aisha's bed, and as the needle slid into her vein, she clenched her fists but did not flinch. Blood began to flow, a silent sacrifice, crimson life traded for another's chance to live. Ravi couldn't tear his eyes away. He wanted to speak, to stop her, to thank her, to say anything, but the words lodged in his throat. All he could do was watch, as if for the first time in years, the world had reminded him that money wasn't the only currency that mattered. Minutes felt like hours. Shastri's face grew paler, beads of sweat forming on her forehead. Her breathing slowed, but her gaze never left Aisha. She whispered softly, almost like a prayer. "Stay strong, little one. Don't give up." Finally, the doctor checked the monitor and exhaled with relief. "She's stabilizing. The transfusion worked." The crisis has passed. A wave of relief hit Ravi so hard he almost stumbled. His daughter would live, not because of his wealth, not because of his connections, but because of the courage of a maid he had nearly dismissed. Later, when Aisha was resting peacefully, Ravi entered the quiet recovery ward. Shastri lay in a separate bed, weak but awake. The nurse had just finished giving her fluids, and though her body was drained, her spirit seemed unbroken. Ravi stopped at the doorway, unsure of how to begin. Gratitude was foreign to him, humility even more so. For years he had built walls of pride so high that not even kindness could climb over them. Finally, he spoke. His voice was low, uneven. "You didn't have to do that." Shastri turned her head slowly, her lips curving into a faint smile. "I know, but some things you don't think about. You just do them." Ravi swallowed hard. "You risked your life. For my daughter. For someone who isn't your family." Shastri's eyes softened. "She is someone's daughter. And to me, she is more than just that. She is a child who deserves to live. Isn't that enough?" The simplicity of her answer pierced through Ravi like nothing else could. He had spent his entire life believing people acted out of profit or fear. Yet here was a woman who had given without expecting anything in return. For the first time in years, Ravi bowed his head. Not out of defeat, but out of respect. Days turned into weeks, and the household slowly shifted. When Aisha returned home from the hospital, she clung to Shastri more than ever. She wanted her by her side during meals, wanted her to read bedtime stories, wanted her hand to hold whenever she felt afraid. Ravi noticed. At first it unsettled him. He had always believed affection should come from within the family, not from outsiders. But one evening, he stood silently at Aisha's door and listened as Shastri told her a story from her village, a tale about fireflies lighting up the dark night. Aisha's laughter rang out, pure and carefree. It struck Ravi then. His daughter had smiled more in the past week than she had in months, and it wasn't because of expensive doctors or toys. It was because of Shastri's warmth. For the first time, Ravi began to see her not as the maid, but as a person. One evening, as Shastri cleared the dining table, Ravi spoke without looking up. "You should rest earlier. You've been working too hard." Shastri paused, startled. Ravi had never spoken to her in such a tone before. Not an order, not a reprimand, almost concern. "I'm fine," she said softly. "Work doesn't tire me. In fact, being here with her, it gives me strength." Ravi's eyes lifted to hers. For a fleeting moment, there was no barrier of class, no wall of pride, just two human beings connected by the life of a little girl. But change, Ravi knew, did not come easily. One evening, during a business dinner at his mansion, some of his wealthy associates noticed Shastri serving drinks. Her plain clothes, her simple demeanor, her lack of polish, they laughed behind their glasses. "Bopara," one man said with a smirk. "Haven't you learned by now? 7 maids fired, and now you keep this one. Surely a man of your stature deserves better staff." The words stung Ravi. For a brief second, the old instinct flared, the urge to fire her, to maintain his image, to prove his superiority. His lips parted, ready to dismiss her on the spot. But then, his gaze shifted to Aisha, sitting nearby, smiling up at Shastri as she adjusted the child's shawl. The warmth in his daughter's eyes silenced his pride. Ravi looked back at his associate, his voice cold but firm. "She stays, and she's worth more than all of you combined." The laughter died at the table. The guests exchanged glances, surprised at the sharpness of his tone. Shastri, standing quietly at the corner, had heard every word. She lowered her gaze, not out of shame this time, but to hide the tears welling in her eyes. For the first time, since she entered that mansion, she realized she was no longer invisible. Life inside the Bopara mansion had changed since the night of the transfusion. The staff moved differently now. Where once they had seen Shastri as the new maid doomed to fail, they now watched her with something close to awe. She had done what none of them ever could. She had given her blood for Aisha, and in doing so she had softened the sharp edges of Ravi Bopara himself. But not everyone welcomed that change. Ravi's world was built on status. He was the man who owned boardrooms, who sat at the head of long, polished tables, who commanded obedience without question. And to that world, Shastri didn't belong. At first it was subtle, a passing remark from a visiting relative. "Really, Ravi? You let your daughter spend so much time with the help. What will people say?" A look of disapproval from his sister, who lived abroad but visited occasionally. "She's a sweet girl, but she's not our kind. You must set boundaries for Aisha's sake." And then came the more direct humiliation. At a charity gala, where Ravi was expected to appear flawless in every sense, Aisha, restless and nervous in the crowd, had insisted on Shastri's presence. Ravi had reluctantly allowed it, but as soon as they entered the grand ballroom, whispers followed. "Is that the maid? My God, he actually brought her here. Doesn't he know appearances matter?" Shastri herself felt the sting of it. She stood at the edge of the room, wearing the only decent sari she owned, her hands folded in front of her. She knew she didn't fit. The chandeliers, the gowns, the diamond jewelry all screamed of a world she could never belong to. But when Aisha tugged her hand and whispered, "Stay close, please," she stood tall, despite the whispers. Ravi noticed it too. The old Ravi, the man who once fired maids for breathing wrong, would have cared deeply about the laughter, the gossip, the smirks behind wine glasses. But something in him shifted that night. Instead of shame, he felt anger. Not at Shastri, but at the people who dared to judge her. Back at the mansion, Ravi's conflict grew heavier. Late one evening, after Aisha had fallen asleep, Ravi found himself in his study staring at the fire. He replayed the past weeks in his mind, Shastri's steady hands holding the teacup for Aisha, her lullabies echoing softly in the corridors, her courage in the hospital. For years, he had believed strength was found in power, in control, in being untouchable. But here was a woman who had none of those things, yet she had shown a strength he couldn't comprehend, and it unsettled him. He poured himself a glass of whiskey, though the drink offered no comfort. His mind wrestled with questions he had never asked before. Why does she matter to Aisha so much? Why does her voice silence my storms? Why does her presence disturb me? For the first time in his life, Ravi Bopara, the millionaire untouchable, felt vulnerable. Meanwhile, Shastri carried her own burdens silently. Each month, when she sent her wages back to her village, she thought of her mother's frail body and her sister's abandoned school books. Sometimes she skipped meals herself so she could save a little extra to send home. One evening, as she sat in her small servants' quarters writing a letter to her mother, tears fell onto the page. She wiped them quickly, afraid someone might see. She didn't want pity. She didn't want to be looked at as a beggar in this world of gold. What she didn't know was that Ravi, on his way to check on Aisha, had paused outside her door. He heard the soft sobs, the hurried sound of paper being folded, and for a moment he stood frozen. He could have walked away, but instead he knocked lightly. Shastri startled, quickly hiding the letter. "Sir?" Ravi stepped in, his face unreadable. "Are you unwell?" "No," she said quickly, forcing a smile. "Just tired." He didn't press further. But later that night, when he sat alone, the image of her teary eyes haunted him. He realized he had never once considered her life beyond these walls. To him, she had always been just the maid. Now, for the first time, he wondered, who is she when she leaves this mansion? What weight does she carry alone? The answer came sooner than he expected. A week later, Shastri received a frantic call. Her mother had collapsed, and the village doctor demanded urgent treatment in the city. The cost was far beyond what she could afford. She hesitated for hours before mustering the courage to speak to Ravi. She found him in the study, flipping through contracts. "Sir," she began cautiously, "I need some advance on my salary. My mother is ill. I will work double, whatever you ask, but please." Ravi looked up sharply. His first instinct was the old one, to reject, to remind her that personal matters had no place in his house. But then he saw the desperation in her eyes, the same eyes that had not hesitated to give blood for his daughter. "How much?" he asked. She froze. "Sir," I said, "how much do you need?" Her lips trembled as she whispered the amount. To Ravi, it was pocket change, but to Shastri, it was life or death. Without another word, he signed a check and slid it across the desk. Shastri took it with both hands, tears forming again. I'll repay you." Ravi shook his head. His voice was softer than she had ever heard. "Some debts can't be repaid in money." But not everyone in Ravi's circle saw things the same way. When word spread that he had not only defended a maid publicly, but also supported her family, the criticism turned harsher. Business associates muttered about his poor judgment. Relatives whispered that he was lowering his standards. One afternoon, his longtime business partner, Mr. Malhotra, visited him privately. "Ravi," he said gravely, "you're letting emotions cloud your decisions. First, you let that maid become too close to your daughter. Now you're involving yourself in her personal affairs. This is not like you. People are talking." Ravi's jaw tightened. "Let them talk." Malhotra leaned forward. "You've built an empire on fear and respect. Don't throw it away for sentiment." But Ravi only looked toward the window, where he could see Aisha in the garden laughing with Shastri as they blew soap bubbles together. For the first time in years, the mansion looked alive. "Maybe," Ravi said quietly. "Sentiment is exactly what I've been missing." Ravi Bopara had built walls around his heart long before anyone realized it. Wealth, he discovered, was a fortress, but also a prison. For years, he'd kept everyone at arm's length, believing loyalty was bought, not earned. But now, every time he caught sight of Shastri's face, whether she was folding bedsheets in the corridor, speaking gently to the staff, or simply humming softly as she moved about, those walls began to tremble. It had been 2 weeks since she donated her blood to save Mira. Ravi had thanked her, yes, but the words felt shallow even to him. How could a thank you repay a woman who had given her very lifeblood to save his child? He found himself lingering longer in the rooms where she worked, his stern eyes softening without his consent. But Shastri did not bask in his attention. She was different. Unlike the previous maids, she wasn't desperate to please him or terrified of his temper. She performed her duties with quiet dignity, as though she wasn't serving a billionaire but rather serving her own conscience. She wasn't afraid to tell him when she disagreed. That alone unsettled Ravi. He wasn't used to being questioned. A clash in the garden one evening, as the sun dipped behind the sprawling gardens of Ravi's estate. He found Shastri kneeling among the roses. She was carefully removing weeds, her hands stained with soil. "You don't need to do that," Ravi said, his deep voice startling her slightly. "We have gardeners for this." Shastri looked up, wiping her brow with the back of her hand. "Yes, but the gardener was busy with the hedges. These roses would have been choked by weeds if left another day." Ravi frowned. "Still, it's not your job." She tilted her head, eyes steady. "When something needs to be done, Mr. Bopara, do you always wait for the right person to do it, or do you act?" Her words struck him harder than he expected. For years, he had commanded, ordered, and dismissed. But here was a woman who believed action spoke louder than titles. "You're different," he muttered, almost to himself. Shastri smiled faintly. "Different can be good, or troublesome. It depends on how you see it." Mira's laughter returns. The real transformation, however, was in Mira. Since her illness, Ravi's daughter had grown quiet and withdrawn. Doctors had said it might take time before she regained her old cheerful self. But Ravi noticed something remarkable. Whenever Shastri was nearby, Mira lit up. He would watch as his daughter, frail but smiling, listened to Shastri tell stories from her childhood. Tales of growing up in a poor neighborhood, of sneaking mangoes from the trees, of singing songs to her little brother when storms frightened him. One night, Ravi passed by Mira's room and paused at the doorway. Shastri was sitting by the bedside, telling a story with her hands animated, her voice carrying a soft melody. Mira was giggling, her cheeks flushed with joy Ravi hadn't seen in months. For the first time in years, Ravi felt his throat tighten. Not with anger, but with gratitude, an invitation. The following day, Ravi made a decision that surprised even himself. "Shastri," he said as they crossed paths in the hall. She stopped, clutching a basket of laundry. "Yes, Mr. Bopara?" "Dinner, tonight, with me and Mira," her brows furrowed. "Dinner? Sir, I'm the maid. Not tonight," Ravi interrupted firmly. "Tonight, you're our guest." Shastri hesitated, uncertain if this was some test of loyalty. But later that evening, she found herself seated at the long mahogany dining table. Ravi had ordered the chefs to prepare a simple meal, knowing extravagance might make her uncomfortable. At first, silence hung heavy. Ravi wasn't used to casual conversation, and Shastri wasn't used to sitting across from a man whose name dominated newspapers. But Mira, in her innocence, broke the tension. "Papa," she said, grinning, "Shastri tells better stories than you." Ravi raised an eyebrow. "Better than mine? Impossible." Shastri laughed softly. "That's a challenge then, Mr. Bopara." That night, they shared stories, some silly, some heartfelt. And for the first time, Ravi realized that his mansion, with all its marble and chandeliers, had never felt like a home until now. The world outside the mansion, but change never comes without resistance. The next morning, Ravi's business associates noticed the shift in him. He smiled more, barked fewer orders, and even canceled a meeting. To spend the afternoon with Mira in the gardens, whispers began to circle among his circle of friends and within his household staff. "She's manipulating him," one maid sneered in hushed tones. "First the blood donation, now this. She knows what she's doing," another added. Shastri heard the rumors. They stung, but she kept her head high. She had not come to the mansion to win a millionaire's favor. She had come for the salary to support her family back in her village. Yet, She couldn't deny it anymore. Her heart stirred whenever Ravi's eyes lingered on her. And Ravi, too, found himself at war with his emotions. He had always believed love was weakness, that vulnerability could be exploited. But watching Shastri care for Meera with a mother's tenderness, he began to wonder if perhaps love was strength after all. A storm approaches. One evening, during a late business meeting in his home office, Ravi received a call. His face hardened as he listened. When he hung up, Shastri noticed his jaw clenched. "Is something wrong?" she asked gently. "A rival company," he replied tersely. "They're accusing me of fraud. It's a lie, but in this world, lies spread faster than truth." Shastri placed a hand on the back of a chair, her expression steady. "And how will you fight it?" Ravi glanced at her. He was used to advisors who trembled before him, but Shastri looked at him with calm defiance. "With truth," he said finally, "and with people I can trust." Her lips curved into a faint smile. "Then you're not fighting alone." Ravi didn't say it aloud, but in that moment, he realized something startling. For the first time in years, he didn't feel alone. The walls around his heart weren't just trembling now. They were beginning to fall. The day Ravi Bopara signed the papers to officially establish the Bopara Foundation for Children's Health, the air in his mansion felt lighter, as though the walls themselves were breathing differently. Reporters gathered outside, eager to cover the story of a once-feared tycoon who had turned his wealth into a mission for healing. But for Ravi, none of this was about public image. It was about redemption, about a man who had nearly lost everything and was given a second chance, not by money, not by power, but by a woman who came into his life quietly and transformed it with one selfless act. That woman was Shastri. The morning of gratitude. It had been 3 months since Anaya's miraculous recovery. Every morning now, Ravi would find his daughter humming again, her little feet tapping against the marble floor as she played with her dolls. It was a sound that once seemed impossible. One morning, as he entered the kitchen, Ravi found Shastri already there, preparing breakfast. She had grown comfortable in the house, not as a maid anymore, but as someone Ravi trusted with his life. She wore a simple sari, her hair neatly tied back, and her face carried the calm dignity of a woman who knew her worth. "Good morning." "Ravi, sir," she greeted softly. "Shastri," Ravi corrected with a small smile. "It's just Ravi now." "No more, sir," she gave a shy laugh. "Old habits take time." "And some habits," Ravi replied, "need to change." Before she could protest, Anaya came running into the room, clutching her teddy bear. She ran straight to Shastri, hugging her tightly. "Mama, Shastri!" Anaya giggled. Ravi froze. Shastri's eyes widened. She gently stroked the child's hair but looked uncertain, glancing at Ravi for guidance. He felt a lump rise in his throat. He remembered all the boardrooms, the endless deals, the millions he had chased like a man possessed. Yet in that moment, the only treasure he saw was standing in front of him. A woman who had given her blood, her strength, her very soul to save his daughter. "She's not wrong," Ravi said finally, his voice husky. Shastri blinked, confused. "Ravi, what do you mean?" "I mean," he continued, his gaze steady, "Anaya already sees you as family, and so do I." The confession later that evening, after Anaya had gone to bed, Ravi asked Shastri to join him on the balcony. The city lights shimmered in the distance, but his eyes remained fixed on her. "I've spent my life firing people," Ravi began, his tone somber. "I thought loyalty was something money could buy. I thought care came with a contract. But you proved me wrong." Shastri lowered her gaze, her fingers twisting the edge of her sari. "You didn't just work here. You gave me something no one else ever did. Faith. Faith that humanity still exists. Faith that a man like me could be more than his mistakes." Her eyes glistened. "Ravi, I didn't do it for praise. I did it because Anaya needed me. She's innocent. She deserves to live, and I couldn't watch you lose her. I know what it's like to lose family. Ravi reached for her hand. And I know what it's like to find one again. For the first time in years, his voice trembled, not with anger, but with vulnerability. Shastri, I don't want you to be just the woman who saved my daughter. I want you to be the woman who saves me. Will you stay? Not as staff, not as a helper, but as part of this family. Shastri's breath caught. She had always been strong, resilient, unshaken. But this moment broke her guard. Her eyes filled with tears, and she whispered, "Yes, Ravi, I'll stay." A changed man. The mansion transformed in the weeks that followed. Where once it had been a place of fear, maids walking on eggshells, silence echoing through its halls, it now filled with warmth. The kitchen smelled of spices and laughter. The garden bloomed because Shastri encouraged Anaya to plant flowers with her tiny hands. Ravi no longer carried the stiffness of a man chained by wealth. Instead, he spent mornings helping Anaya with her drawings and evenings listening to Shastri tell stories of her childhood. The staff who remained in the mansion felt the shift too. Ravi treated them with respect, something none of them had expected. Word spread quickly across the city. The once cold-hearted Ravi Bopara had changed. The reunion, 6 months later, Ravi organized a charity gala under the banner of his new foundation. The grand hall glittered with chandeliers, and dignitaries from across the country attended. They had come expecting the usual pomp and arrogance of a millionaire. Instead, they witnessed something different. Ravi stood before them, his daughter by his side, and spoke with humility. "Money once blinded me," he admitted to the crowd. "I thought power was the only way to protect my world. But when my daughter's life hung by a thread, money couldn't save her. A woman with no riches, no power and no reason to stay, gave her blood to save Anaya. She gave me back my life. And today I dedicate my fortune not to building towers, but to building hope, for every child, for every family who cannot afford it." The hall erupted in applause. Cameras flashed, but Ravi didn't look at the reporters. His eyes found Shastri. In the crowd, her sari glowing softly under the lights, her eyes shining with quiet pride. And in that moment, he realized he no longer needed validation from the world. He had already found everything he wanted, the ending that felt like a beginning. That night, as the gala ended, Ravi stood with Shastri and Anaya on the terrace, the stars glimmering above them. Anaya tugged on Ravi's sleeve. "Papa," she whispered, "do we get to keep Mama Shastri forever?" Ravi smiled, looking at the woman who had changed his life. "Yes, Anaya, forever." Shastri's eyes brimmed with tears, but her heart felt lighter than ever before. She wasn't just a maid anymore. She wasn't just a woman who once struggled, in silence. She was family. And for Ravi, the man who once fired 7 maids without a thought, he had finally learned the most priceless lesson. The greatest wealth is not in what you own, but in who you hold close.